Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO Podcast Special Edition. Over the last 12 months, I've released 2 seasons of the podcast and we're halfway through delivering season 3. I'm excited that I've reached more than 5,200 downloads in just 25 episodes. Building cybersecurity teams is a pretty niche topic for a podcast, so I've been thrilled to be able to share some really great guests with you. And as committed and loyal audience members of the Secure CIO podcast, I thought that we might celebrate by looking back at the top 5 most popular episodes of the show so far, in no particular order. To kick things off, I'm going to take you all the way back to episode 1 of season 1, where we interviewed Jonathan Werrett. Jonathan and I talked about a whole range of things across his career and building teams. And the one thing I wanted to highlight today was our conversation around the making of leaders. When people get to leadership, there's this expectation by many organisations, and you only have to read job descriptions on LinkedIn or any of the job boards to see that a lot of organisations at the leadership level are trying to find, what some might call a unicorn. And so, at the lower levels, we're bringing people in and they're in kind of very siloed, same kind of demographics. And yet at the leadership level, there's this expectation that people have broad-ranging experience and they can do everything from configuring a firewall to speaking to the board. What do you think about that? What advice would you give to an organisation that is trying to hire a leader that can just do it all?
Well, I wish them luck if they're doing that. But if leadership can only be done by people that have got experience across all the different disciplines in security or accounting or, I don't know, the legal side of things, then you're setting yourself up for failure. On the security side of things, no company can address all the risk that it faces, and no person can know every field or subspecialty. It's just saying that makes it pretty ridiculous. 3 years ago, the technology we were using is completely different to the technology we're using today, and in 3 years' time, it will have changed again. So I think rather than looking for a unicorn, have an idea of what you think the biggest risks are and what the most important skills will be in that person, and start optimizing for those. Business strategy is about choosing not to do things, and I think it's probably the same with hiring.
Next up, we had Nick Ellsmore, who closed out season 1. Nick is one of the founders of Hivint, a trust-wave company, and Nick has also started a number of great Australian security startups. I spoke to Nick about the impact of how the first security leader in an organisation would shape the perceptions about security, and if there is an ultimate path to security leadership. It's interesting that you talk about the change over time, and I certainly think that organisations have started to wake up to the need to have security staff within their organisation, and I guess complement that with organisations such as yourselves or whichever they choose in terms of third parties who can bring that really sort of sharp, up-to-date security advice. If you were approached by one of your clients who wanted to start building the function themselves inside their organisation, what would your advice be about where they should start? So, are they best to start with a leader? Are they best to start with an analyst, an architect? I mean, what, from your perspective, is a great place to start?
It depends a little on, and I always laugh when I start an answer with "it depends," because it's the perpetual consultant answer to a question. But it depends a little on how big the function's going to be, in the sense that if you're building a function of 3 people, you've got a little less latitude than if you're building a function of 10. And it also depends a little on where they're starting from. So, do you need a salesperson to get the budget, or do you have the budget and you need a program manager to execute it properly? But in a sense, even that discussion is a little of what I was sort of referring to earlier when discussing that a lot of security isn't that different to other disciplines, or at least the security knowledge alone isn't often what's going to get the job done. So my sort of overall advice would be, one, to find someone relationships, because again, the discussion before about the number 2, 3, or 4 hire in a company, your first security manager in an organisation is going to shape the way that function is perceived by the organisation. We went through the dark ages for 10 or 15 years where the security team was considered the department of no, because pretty much that's what we spent our time saying. So I think it's now very important to make sure that the first hire in a security team, in a security function, is either going to be able to be that salesperson, and that's both up to get the budget and also throughout the organisation to explain why they're there and that they are actually a force for good. And I think a lot of the key for that is someone who is pragmatic and who knows the difference between security and compliance.
On that point, I mean, I love the idea that who you hire is dependent on how big you plan for your team to be. And I think that's a really important point, that security leaders really need to plan how big their team is going to be and the types of roles they want in it, and that sort of operating model before they go out to market for the first role, because you can't really know the components or the non-negotiables of each candidate until you've planned out sort of what your vision is about, I suppose. From your perspective, and having built teams and companies and having met a lot of people, in terms of the types of staff that come in, have you seen any ultimate path? I think security leaders come from such different places, and so do potentially security professionals. And Hivint have shown that, you mentioned before, you've got lawyers, you've got social workers, you've got people from all across the demographics. Is there an ultimate path? Should someone cut their teeth in one place or another?
I think that the easy answer is whatever's going to make most sense for the organisation that's recruiting. I guess what I mean by that is there are so many different types of security leaders, and I remember reading somewhere this concept that if you get to the point where you're a CEO, at the CEO level, you basically need to be able to condense what you do in big picture terms down to a sentence, if not a few words. And basically there are CEOs who are they're growth leaders. There are CEOs who are builders or acquirers, and they just go and acquire lots of companies. There are CEOs who are cost cutters, and pretty much that's your future, which is an organisation that is going to bring in a cost-cutting CEO who every CEO role they cut costs is doing that because they want that CEO to cut costs. So I think for sort of security leaders, in a sense, the question is, what are you about? What is that message that you have that is going to sort of set you apart, or going to make it really, really easy for everyone to understand what it is that you do? And it can't be, I secure things. It's like, yep, great. We're all here to secure things. We're all in the security team. Maybe it's, and also, we went through this period where a lot of CIO roles started going to CFOs or ex-CFOs, because the CIO role was suddenly about contract management because everyone was outsourcing things. And so it was actually much more of a finance function than it was a technology function. So there's that discussion about, as a security leader, are you there to move things out into a managed security service provider? Are you there to try and consolidate systems and try and really reduce the threat profile? Are you there to try and loosen things up, try and actually get the business moving faster by sort of opening up the risk appetite a little bit? And I think having that sort of thought process will then allow you to think about sort of what background you need to have, what you need to do to be that person and to get to that point.
When I called up my good friend Anna Leibel, who is a CIO and a board member, to record our episode of the podcast, we actually decided to ditch the audio that day, and we did a live recording of the podcast instead to close out season 2. Anna came along as my guest in front of a live audience, and we covered a lot. So you can watch the full video version on my YouTube channel, the Secure CIO. But today I'm going to share with you Anna's response to how information security is impacting boards.
I know that you've begun working as a non-executive director in addition to your role at UniSuper, so it's a pretty heavy workload. What trends are you seeing in relation to cyber from a board perspective?
So we had a meeting today for UniSuper with the subcommittee of our board, so really good to talk about that now, and a topic that we covered off today, but also what I'm seeing with Ambulance Victoria. And for me, it's the significant shift over the past 2 years. 2.5 years ago, we would talk about how much money do I have to spend to make sure we're safe, and now we're talking about are we prepared for when we are breached. I think that's in 2.5 years, that is a very short time frame to have shifted the conversation so significantly. Also around helping other board members understand the basics at least of security to make sure they've got awareness about that. So a few weeks ago I did the AICD Cybersecurity course, and a lot of people were finding it overwhelming purely because of the topic around cyber. And when we were doing a group activity at our table, and I suggested that they think about it as risk. And when you actually take the techie elements out of it and put a risk lens over it, that probably covers a majority, maybe 60% or 70% of what they are required to do as board members. And then I think it's working with people with a technology background to just help build that base so they've got a general understanding of it.
Because at the end of the day, cyber is a cause to so many other risks being realised.
Mm-hmm.
And so to flip their mindset is a much better way to look at it rather than being frightened off by the term cyber. What do you think has shifted the things in the last 2 years? So you mentioned that they've gone from sort of not a low awareness to maybe a more slightly fearful awareness or enough information to be dangerous. What sort of pushed the pendulum in the other direction?
I think it's if I can compare that to what's an emerging theme now, I think for boards is climate change and the risk around climate. I think if anything, there's always going to be something that's an emerging risk for a board, and so their focus shifts. And I think when you're an active board member with a passion for learning and knowing that you need to have an understanding of new trends, I think that's where the curiosity is coming from. I think then there's also so much in the media. So whether you're watching something on LinkedIn or whether there's something on the news, I think we're hearing about it a lot more as well. And then on top of that, the regulatory elements of it.
At the end of the night, the last question I asked Anna was about whether or not she thought it mattered that when you hire a cybersecurity leader, if you hire someone with a deep technical background or not. And here's what she had to say.
Just leading on from what we were just talking about, asking a lot of questions to the head of security. The person that you chose has a pretty deep technical background. What is it about that you think either benefits or hinders security within your business? Do you think the background of the security leader has an impact on how security plays out in your organisation?
I think it depends on the makeup of the team. So I think about this a lot in terms of do you need a really technical person in my role and all that sort of stuff. So I think my answer to you is more generic, but I think that my point of view is relevant in this situation as well. I think you get a very, very technical team, you could have a less technical leader. I definitely think it depends on the profile of your team, and that's why it's important I think when you're building a team at the rate that we did, it was important to me to bring the leader in and then start building the team, because once again it's back to that diversity and making sure that you've got the right skill set, capability to actually do what you need to deliver.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming along. Thanks for all your questions.
Next up, we met Craig Searle. There's not many people in the Australian information security industry that haven't met or interacted with Craig. Craig is the other founder of Hivint, a Trustwave company, and Craig had so much to share about how he and Nick had brought together their business, but also around diversity and really bringing together some fabulous teams. I'm going to share with you today some of Craig's tips for how they sourced some great people. And personally, I believe that Nick and Craig did such a great job of building their teams and their business because they were really clear on the types of people that they wanted to work with, but they were also heavily invested in the recruitment process, which I think makes a huge difference when you're bringing together a team. Here's Craig's tips on sourcing people into Hivint. finding those people that are moldable and can learn these things. I mean, you've built a successful, large employee community, more than 80 staff now. What do you think has drawn people to come to work with you? What was your organisation for yourself and for Nick? What were you doing differently that was bringing in people that wanted to work with you guys?
Actually, I think that's it, is that we were doing something different. We were very open and upfront about what we wanted to do, and that we were building a business around the concept of collaboration in cybersecurity. And we had a very particular ethos around the team. We wanted to be a part of that, the types of people we wanted to work with. And really, that allowed us to start to attract talent based on the fact that people believed in that philosophy and the way we would go about delivering that kind of services and capabilities. So for us, it was being upfront about who we were and being not just unashamed of it, but being quite vocal and proud of that. And really that attracted people in that it's not just about, the services you offer, but, you're spending 12, maybe 15 hours a day with these people. So there's got to be some shared beliefs that allow you to kind of get through the hard times and the good times. And so doing that allowed us to start to attract that core group of talent. And then over time, really, it was one of our big beliefs is that good people attract more good people. And in fact, what ended up happening was it may not necessarily be that people wanted to work with Nick and I, they wanted to work with other team members in our team. And so that then attracted more people and so on and so forth. They attracted more people. And you get to this point where there's almost a sense of inertia that you're able to attract talent based on the fact of the team you have and the customers you have and the work you do. And actually, it does get easier to recruit on that basis. And if you look at some of the most successful companies, not just in the cybersecurity industry, but more broadly, they tend to attract talent on that basis as well. There's a belief in the mission and the philosophy and the people that inspires to come and work there. And in the same way, that then drags more people in. So it starts to become a bit self-propelling after a while.
And finally, Dan Maslin. Since we recorded the podcast, Dan has now become the CISO at Monash University. But back when we spoke a few months ago, Dan and I talked not only about how you make decisions around insourcing and outsourcing of staff and the types of capabilities and services you should have in your organisation, but we also talked about what advice you would give your 20-year-old self. And if you've listened to the podcast for the last few seasons, you would know I try to ask most of my guests this same question. And here are Dan's thoughts around what he would tell his younger self around building teams.
Have you got an opinion on what is valuable to insource and what's valuable to outsource within your team? Mm-hmm. And I guess what experience have you had in successes around that side of things as well?
I think this applies across IT, not just cyber, but you always want to have in-house certain things that are related to strategy. So, setting your North Star, that definitely needs to stay in-house. And risk management, anything related to risk, you really want to have in-house as well. So you've got a good grip on that. In terms of what can be outsourced and what I've seen outsourced successfully, where you need really, really deep technical skills that you may not touch on every day. So you may only utilize these types of things, once a month or once every 6 months. So things like unusual types of penetration testing, reverse engineering of malware, those sorts of things. Typically, in most organizations, you're not going to need those skills every single day. It makes sense to outsource those. And where there's repeatable processes, so you might have a managed service to look out after your SIEM platform, for example, to keep that up and running. They do the patching, they keep the lights on, they do the hardware replacement. So where there's that repeatable stuff, we can free up our valuable internal resources to do some things that are a bit more valuable to the organisation.
So what do you wish you'd known, Dan, way back when you were, say, 20? I ask all my podcast guests this question. Is there something you wish you could have told your younger self about building teams that you know now that would have helped to make things better or change things or allow you to have built teams maybe earlier in your career? What would be one thing that you would go back and say?
Yeah, so if I was to go back in time and give myself some advice around leadership 15 years ago, it would probably be that sometimes, the organisation is not the right fit, or it's not the right time for certain people within that organization. And I'd say to myself that is okay, and that does happen. And you need to have that conversation pretty quickly. You need to nip that in the bud early on, particularly if expectations aren't being met. So, it may be the right organisation but the wrong time, or vice versa. But don't delay those difficult conversations. Rip off the band-aid and have those honest discussions sooner rather than later. I think it's better for everyone involved, the team member, the manager, and team morale. These things are noticed by the team when there isn't a good mix, and the advice would be it is okay for it not to be the right time or the right organisation for people, and have those difficult conversations sooner rather than later.
I think that's such good advice, because those conversations actually make you a better leader and make you a better manager. And 9 times out of 10, the person sitting on the other side of the table is really grateful that you've raised it, because maybe they've been looking for a way to raise it themselves.
Yeah, I feel that as well. It's I've had a number of these difficult conversations over the years, and you're right, 9 times out of 10, they're well aware of the situation. It's no surprise, and they're happy to have the discussion, an open discussion.
So that's it. Some small snippets from the top 5 most popular episodes of the Secure CIO podcast so far. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate your time and for your help to make sure that my podcast has become a really great success. Here's to another 5,000 downloads, or maybe more. And please continue listening to Season 3. Each Thursday we drop an episode very early in the morning, and feel free to spend some time listening to the back catalogue. And the full episodes of these top 5 that I've shared with you today are available wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd like to know more about my book or join my newsletter list, you can head to thesecurecio.com. And I'll see you next week.